My name is Rachel Kincaid. I'm 34 years old. And the night the head of surgery stood at a podium in front of 200 people and called my name, my mother was sitting 3 rows behind me, whispering to my father that this had to be some kind of mistake. I heard her. The room was packed with hospital staff, board members, donors, and a handful of family guests invited to the annual recognition dinner. I was sitting near the back in a navy dress I'd bought on sale 2 weeks earlier, half listening to speeches about patient outcomes and departmental achievements, when Dr. Angela Torres stepped up to the microphone. She was the head of surgery at Northridge Medical Center, one of the most respected trauma surgeons in the state, and known for her precision both in the operating room and in her words. When she spoke, people listened. She thanked the usual departments. She acknowledged funding partners. Then she paused, looked down at her notes, and said something that made my stomach drop. We also want to recognize someone whose leadership on a recent case, quite frankly, saved lives. This person coordinated between 4 departments, managed complex post-surgical care under extraordinarily difficult conditions, and held the team together when things could have gone very wrong. I didn't move. She continued, "Rachel Kincaid, our senior ICU nurse, would you please stand?" For a second I thought I'd misheard. Then I felt every pair of eyes in the room turn toward me. My mother's voice rose just loud enough for the people around us to hear. "Rachel? What is she talking about?" I stood slowly, my legs shaking, and looked toward the front of the room where Dr. Torres was smiling at me like she'd been waiting for this moment. Before I tell you what she said next and why my mother spent the rest of the evening acting like I'd personally embarrassed her, tell me this. Have you ever been really good at something and had the people closest to you treat it like a hobby? Like something that fills time but doesn't actually matter? I need you to understand how we got here. Because this wasn't about one night or one speech. This was about 17 years of being told that what I did for a living wasn't quite good enough to be proud of. I became a nurse when I was 23, not because it was my backup plan, but because I'd wanted to work in healthcare since I was 16 and spent a summer volunteering at a hospital near my grandmother's house. I loved the clarity of it, the way a shift had a beginning and an end, the way you could see whether someone was improving or declining just by paying attention, the way small actions, done correctly, could mean the difference between stability and crisis. I went to nursing school, passed my boards, got my first job in a busy urban ER, and worked my way up to the ICU within 5 years. By the time I was 30, I was one of the most senior nurses on my floor. I trained new hires. I ran codes. I collaborated with doctors on treatment plans. I caught mistakes before they became disasters. I was good at my job. My family knew I was a nurse. They just didn't know what that meant. To them, nursing was something vague and supportive. Something women did because they liked helping people. Something respectable enough to mention at church, but not interesting enough to ask questions about. My mother introduced me to her friends as Rachel, my daughter. She's a nurse. She said it the same way she said my sister's a marketing director, with the unspoken implication that one title sounded better than the other. Lauren worked for a mid-sized advertising firm. She made decent money, wore business casual, and had an office with her name on the door. My mother loved talking about Lauren's work. She loved saying things like, "Lauren just landed a campaign with a national brand," or "Lauren's traveling to New York for a pitch meeting." When people asked about me, my mother said, "Rachel works at the hospital." And that was it. No mention of the ICU, no mention of critical care, no acknowledgement that I held people's lives in my hands on a regular basis. Just, she works at the hospital. My father was worse in a different way. He was a retired engineer, the kind of man who respected credentials and hierarchy, and to him nurses were staff. Necessary staff, sure, but staff nonetheless. Once at a family gathering, someone asked what I did, and before I could answer, my father said, "Rachel's in the medical field. She assists doctors." I corrected him. "I'm an ICU nurse. I manage patient care independently and work alongside physicians, not under them." He'd smiled like I was being pedantic. "Sure," he said, "you're part of the team." It wasn't worth arguing about, so I didn't. But it stuck with me. The way he'd reduced 17 years of training, certification, and experience into assist doctors. The worst part was that they weren't trying to be cruel. They genuinely didn't understand what I did. And because they didn't understand, they couldn't value it. About 6 months before the recognition dinner, I was part of a case that became the talk of the hospital. A patient came into our ICU after a severe car accident, multiple injuries, internal bleeding, a collapsed lung. He was critical and his condition was deteriorating fast. The attending physician, Dr. Marcus Chen, was excellent, but he was also managing 3 other patients that night, and this one required constant attention. Someone had to be watching vitals every minute, coordinating with surgery, respiratory, and pharmacy, making split-second decisions about medications and interventions. That someone was me. For 72 hours, I barely left that patient's bedside. I caught a medication interaction that could have caused kidney failure. I noticed a breathing pattern that signaled fluid buildup before it showed up on the monitors. I ran a code when his heart stopped at 3 in the morning and kept compressions going until the crash team arrived. By the end of the week, he was stable. A month later, he walked out of the hospital. Dr. Torres heard about it from Dr. Chen. She stopped by the ICU one afternoon and asked to speak with me privately. We went into one of the small consultation rooms, and she closed the door. "I've been hearing about the Whitman case," she said. I nodded. It was a tough one. "Dr. Chen told me you basically ran that case." I shook my head. "He was the attending. I was just doing my job." She gave me a look. "Rachel, I've been in medicine for 25 years. I know the difference between doing your job and leading a team. You led that case. I didn't know what to say," she continued. "I'm putting you forward for formal recognition at the annual dinner. I want the hospital to know what you did." I felt my face go hot. "You don't have to do that." "I know I don't have to," she said. "I want to." A few weeks later, I mentioned it to my parents, not because I was bragging, but because they'd asked what was new at work. We were having Sunday dinner at their house. My mother had made pot roast. Lauren was there with her boyfriend, Connor. My father was watching the news in the living room. I said, "I'm being recognized at the hospital's annual dinner next month." My mother looked up from the table she was setting. "Recognized for what?" "I coordinated care on a critical patient case. The head of surgery wants to acknowledge the work." She set down a plate. "That's nice, sweetie." Then she turned to Lauren. "Did you finalize the venue for your client's product launch?" And just like that, the subject changed. I sat there with my hands in my lap, trying to tell myself it didn't matter. But it did. The week before the dinner, my mother called. "Your father and I got the invitation to your hospital event. We're planning to come. Lauren and Connor, too." "That's great," I said. She paused. "What exactly is this event? Is it like an awards thing?" "Sort of. It's a fundraiser and recognition dinner. They acknowledge staff who went above and beyond this year." "And you're one of them?" "Yeah." "Well, that's wonderful," she said, but her tone was flat. "What do we wear?" "It's semi-formal." "Okay, we'll see you there." She hung up, and I sat staring at my phone, wondering why I felt worse after that call than I had before. The night of the dinner arrived. I got to the hotel early and checked in at the registration table. My name tag said Rachel Kincaid, RN ICU. I pinned it to my dress and found my assigned table near the middle of the ballroom. A few of my coworkers were already seated. Vanessa, one of the charge nurses. Marcus, a respiratory therapist. Dr. Chen, who smiled when he saw me and said, "Tonight's your night, Kincaid." I laughed nervously. I'm just glad I don't have to give a speech. My family arrived about 20 minutes later. I saw them walking in, my mother in a burgundy dress, my father in a suit that looked like he'd pulled it out of storage, Lauren and Connor following behind. They found the table and sat down. My mother kissed my cheek and said, "This is lovely, very elegant." My father shook hands with Dr. Chen and asked what kind of doctor he was. "I'm not a doctor," Dr. Chen said with a grin. "I'm a respiratory therapist. Like Rachel, I work in the ICU." My father blinked. "Oh, I thought this was a medical staff event." Vanessa, sitting across the table, smiled politely. "It is. Nursing is medical staff." My father nodded, but I could see he didn't quite get it. Dinner was served, and for a while everything felt normal. My mother chatted with Vanessa about the hospital's new wing. Lauren talked to Connor. My father ate quietly and checked his phone a few times. I picked at my chicken and tried to ignore the tightness in my chest. After dessert, the lights dimmed. Dr. Angela Torres stepped up to the podium. "Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here tonight." The room quieted. She went through the usual remarks, thanked the donors, acknowledged the board, talked about the hospital's mission and the importance of the new ICU expansion. Then she said, "Tonight, I want to tell you about a case that reminded all of us why this work matters." A screen behind her lit up with the words, "Critical Care in Action." My stomach dropped. Dr. Torres continued, "In March, we admitted a patient who had been in a severe car accident. He arrived with multiple traumas, internal bleeding, a collapsed lung, and deteriorating vitals. His survival was far from guaranteed." She clicked to the next slide, which showed a timeline of his treatment. This patient required round-the-clock coordination between surgery, respiratory, pharmacy, and ICU nursing. And I want to be very clear about something. This case didn't succeed because one doctor made all the right calls. It succeeded because one nurse saw what the rest of us missed. I felt my hands start to shake. She looked out into the audience. Rachel Kincaid, our senior ICU nurse, flagged a critical medication interaction on day 2 that could have caused renal failure. She identified early signs of pulmonary edema before the imaging confirmed it. And when the patient coded at 3 in the morning, she ran that code with a level of skill and composure that gave us the time we needed to bring him back. My mother shifted in her seat beside me. Dr. Torres paused. Rachel didn't just follow protocols. She anticipated problems. She made judgment calls that required not only technical expertise, but the kind of clinical intuition that comes from years of experience and deep knowledge of critical care medicine. She smiled. "Rachel, would you please stand?" For a second, I couldn't move. Then Vanessa nudged me gently. I stood, my legs trembling, while 200 people turned to look at me. Dr. Torres continued, "This is what excellent nursing looks like, and this is why our ICU expansion matters. Because nurses like Rachel are the backbone of critical care. They don't just assist, they lead." The applause started. I stood there, my face burning, while the room clapped for work I'd done in 12-hour shifts wearing scrubs that smelled like antiseptic and exhaustion. And when I finally sat back down, my mother leaned forward and whispered, "Why didn't you tell us it was this big of a deal?" I didn't answer, because the truth was I had told them. I told them about the case. I told them I was being recognized. They just hadn't cared enough to listen. When the applause finally died down and Dr. Torres moved on to the next part of her speech, I kept my eyes forward and tried to steady my breathing. My hands were still shaking in my lap. Vanessa leaned over and whispered, "You okay?" I nodded, but I wasn't okay. Because sitting 3 rows behind me, my mother was whispering to my father, and I could hear just enough to know she was confused, maybe embarrassed, maybe both. The rest of the program blurred together. More speeches, a video about the new ICU wing, another round of applause for the donors. I smiled when I was supposed to smile and clapped when everyone else clapped, but my mind was somewhere else entirely. When the event finally ended and people started standing up, gathering their coats, saying their goodbyes, I stayed in my seat for a moment longer than I needed to. Dr. Chen came over and shook my hand. "Well deserved," he said. "Thank you." Vanessa hugged me. "Proud of you, Kincaid." Then my family approached. My mother was the first to speak. "Rachel, that was—" She paused, trying to find the right word. "That was very impressive." "Thanks," I said. My father cleared his throat. "We didn't realize you were so involved in that case." I looked at him. "I told you about it. At Sunday dinner, 6 weeks ago." He frowned like he was trying to remember. "You said you worked on a difficult patient. You didn't say you were running the whole thing." "I wasn't running the whole thing," I said quietly. "I was doing my job." Lauren stepped in, her voice bright in that way that meant she was trying to smooth things over. "Well, it's really cool, Rach. Seriously, that doctor made you sound like a total badass." Connor nodded. "Yeah, I had no idea nurses did all that. I forced a smile. Most people don't. My mother touched my arm. We're very proud of you. I wanted to believe her. But the thing is, proud wasn't the word I'd use to describe the look on her face when Dr. Torres had called my name. The word I'd use was surprised. We said our goodbyes in the parking lot. My mother hugged me and said again how impressed she was. My father shook my hand like we'd just closed a business deal. Lauren promised to text me later. Then they got in their car and drove away. I sat in my own car for a long time before starting the engine. My phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa. "You good?" I typed back, "Yeah, just tired." But that wasn't really it. I was tired of being surprised that my own family didn't understand what I did, tired of waiting for them to see me, tired of pretending it didn't hurt when they reduced 17 years of my career into something casual and dismissible. The next morning, my mother called. I was making coffee in my apartment, still in my pajamas, when her name appeared on my screen. I almost didn't answer, but I did. "Good morning, sweetheart," she said. "Your father and I were just talking about last night." I waited. "We're really proud of you." That speech was, well, it was a lot more than we expected. I poured my coffee slowly. "What did you expect?" She hesitated. "I don't know. I guess I thought it would be a nice acknowledgement, a certificate or something. I didn't realize they were going to make such a big production out of it." "It wasn't a production, Mom. It was recognition for work I did." "Of course," she said quickly. "I didn't mean it like that." "Then what did you mean?" She sighed. "Rachel, I'm trying to tell you we're proud. Why are you making this difficult?" I closed my eyes. "I'm not making anything difficult. I'm just trying to understand why you seemed so surprised last night." "Well," she said, her voice tightening, "maybe if you'd explained it better, we wouldn't have been. I explained it 6 weeks ago. You didn't ask any follow-up questions." She was quiet for a second. Then she said, "You know, your father and I don't understand all the medical details. We're not in that world. You can't expect us to know how important something is unless you really spell it out." I wanted to scream, but instead I just said, "I have to go, Mom. Rachel, don't." I hung up. Then I sat at my kitchen table and stared at my coffee until it went cold. That afternoon, Lauren called. "Hey," she said, "Mom told me you guys had a weird conversation this morning." "That's one way to put it," she sighed. "Look, I know they can be kind of clueless sometimes, but they really were proud last night. Mom's been telling everyone about it." I frowned. "Telling everyone what? That you got recognized at some big hospital event? She's acting like it's a huge deal now." "Now," I repeated. Lauren hesitated. I know it's annoying, but at least they're proud, right?" I rubbed my temples. "Lauren, they've had 17 years to be proud. They didn't care until someone else told them they should." She didn't argue, because she knew I was right. We talked for a few more minutes and then she had to go. I sat on my couch after we hung up and tried to figure out why I felt worse instead of better. The problem wasn't that my parents didn't understand nursing. The problem was that they'd never tried to. They'd never asked what my day was like, never asked what kinds of cases I worked on, never asked what it felt like to run a code or manage a critical patient or hold someone's hand while they died. They just assumed that because I wasn't a doctor, what I did wasn't worth learning about. And now that someone with authority had told them I mattered, they wanted credit for being proud. A week later, I went to my parents' house for Sunday dinner like I always did. I almost canceled, but Lauren convinced me not to. "Just go," she said. "It'll be fine." It wasn't fine. I walked in, and my mother immediately said, "Oh, good, you're here." I invited the Hoffmans over for dessert. I told them all about your big night. I set down my purse. "You told the Hoffmans?" "Well, yes. Claire asked how you were doing, and I mentioned the hospital event." She was very impressed. My father came into the room. "We're proud of you, Rachel. We want people to know." I stared at him. "You didn't want people to know 6 weeks ago when I told you about it." He frowned. "That's not fair." "It's true." My mother cut in, her voice sharp. "Rachel, we're trying to celebrate you. Why are you being so difficult?" "I'm not being difficult," I said. "I'm just pointing out that you didn't care about this until someone else made you care." That's not true, my mother said. Then why didn't you ask me any questions when I first told you? Why didn't you seem interested until Dr. Torres stood up in front of 200 people and explained it for you? She opened her mouth, then closed it. Lauren, who had been standing in the doorway, stepped in. Okay, let's all take a breath. But I wasn't done. I looked at my mother. Do you even know what I do every day? She blinked. You're a nurse. What kind of nurse? ICU. What does that mean? She hesitated. It means you work in intensive care. What does intensive care mean? She looked frustrated. Rachel, I don't have a medical degree. I don't know all the terms. I'm not asking for a medical degree, I said quietly. I'm asking if you've ever once been curious enough to ask what my work actually involves. Silence. My father cleared his throat. You're upset. We get it. But we're here now. We're listening now. I shook my head. That's the problem. You shouldn't need a doctor to tell you I'm good at my job before you start listening. My mother's eyes filled with tears. We've always supported you. No, I said. You've always tolerated me. There's a difference. I picked up my purse and walked out. Lauren followed me to my car. Rach, wait. I stopped and turned around. She looked at me, her face pained. I get it. I do. They don't know how to talk about your work. They don't understand it. But they love you. Loving me isn't the same as respecting me, I said. She didn't have an answer for that. I got in my car and drove home. A few days later, I got an email from Dr. Torres. The subject line said, follow up. I opened it. Rachel, thank you again for everything you do. I've been fielding calls from board members and donors all week asking about you. Several people want to know if you'd be willing to speak at future events or serve on committees related to nursing excellence and ICU protocol development. I told them I'd ask. Let me know if you're interested. You deserve to have a voice in these conversations. Best, Angela. I read it twice, then I replied, I'd be honored. That weekend, I didn't go to my parents' house. I stayed home, cleaned my apartment, went for a run, and spent the evening reading a book I'd been meaning to get to for months. My mother called twice. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail. Rachel, your father and I would really like to talk. Please call us back. I didn't, not because I was punishing them, but because I needed space to figure out what I actually wanted from them. And the truth was, I didn't know anymore. For 17 years, I'd been waiting for them to see me, to ask questions, to show interest, to value what I did. And they hadn't, not until someone else told them they should. So what was I supposed to do with that? A week later, Lauren showed up at my apartment unannounced. I opened the door, and she was standing there with 2 coffees and a look that said she wasn't leaving until we talked. I let her in. We sat on my couch, and she handed me one of the coffees. Mom's freaking out, she said. Good. She gave me a look. Come on, Rach. I took a sip of coffee. What do you want me to say, Lauren? That I forgive them? That it's fine? No, she said. I want you to tell me what you need. I looked at her. I need them to understand that what they did hurt. I need them to stop acting like I'm overreacting. And I need them to actually care about my work, not just the version of it that makes them look good at dinner parties. She nodded slowly. Okay, so tell them that. I will, I said, when I'm ready. She stayed for another hour. We talked about other things. Work, her relationship with Connor, a show we were both watching, and when she left, she hugged me and said, For what it's worth, I've always been proud of you. I believed her, but it wasn't enough to fix what my parents had broken. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and wrote an email I wasn't sure I'd ever send. It started with, Mom and Dad, I need you to understand something. And then I wrote everything I'd been holding in for 17 years. How it felt to be dismissed, how it felt to be reduced, how it felt to love a job that my own family treated like a placeholder. I wrote about the night of the recognition dinner, about how humiliating it was to hear my mother whisper that there had to be a mistake. I wrote about Sunday dinners where my work was glossed over in favor of Lauren's latest campaign. I wrote about my father calling me support staff. And I wrote about how much it hurt that they only started caring when someone with a title told them they should. I finished the email, read it over 3 times, and then closed my laptop without sending it. Because the truth was, I wasn't sure they'd understand it even if I did. I didn't send the email that night, or the next night, or the night after that. Instead, I saved it in my drafts folder and tried to move forward. Dr. Torres invited me to join a committee on ICU nursing protocols. I said yes. A few board members reached out asking if I'd be willing to mentor new ICU nurses. I said yes to that too. My work didn't change. I still showed up for 12-hour shifts. I still ran codes and managed critical patients and collaborated with physicians who respected what I brought to the table. But something inside me had shifted. I stopped waiting for my family to validate what I did. I stopped checking my phone, hoping my mother would text something that showed she finally understood. I just kept doing the work. 3 weeks after the recognition dinner, my mother called again. This time, I answered. "Rachel," she said, her voice careful, "I know you're upset with us, and I want to fix that. Can we meet somewhere, just you and me?" I hesitated. "Where? Wherever you want." I thought about it. "There's a cafe near the hospital. I can meet you there tomorrow afternoon." "Okay," she said. "I'll be there." We met at 2:00. She was already seated when I arrived, wearing a blouse I recognized from Christmas 2 years earlier. She looked nervous. I sat down across from her and waited. She folded her hands on the table. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about how we didn't listen, about how we didn't understand your work." I didn't say anything. She continued, "And you're right, we didn't. I didn't. I thought I knew what nursing was, and I didn't ask questions because I assumed I already understood." She looked down at her hands. "But I didn't understand. And I'm sorry." It was the first real apology she'd given me. I took a breath. "Mom, it's not just that you didn't understand. It's that you didn't try. For 17 years, you had opportunities to ask what my work was like, what my days looked like, what it felt like to save someone's life or lose someone or run a code at 3 in the morning, and you never asked." Her eyes filled with tears. "I know. And then, when someone finally told you I was good at my job, you acted like it was news, like you'd discovered something about me you didn't know before. But it wasn't news. It's who I've always been." She nodded, crying now. "I'm so sorry, Rachel." I looked at her for a long moment. "I need you to understand something. I don't need you to be impressed by my job. I don't need you to brag about me to the Hoffmans. I just need you to see me, to care enough to ask, to treat what I do with the same respect you give Lauren's work." She wiped her eyes. "I will. I promise." I wanted to believe her. But promises are easy. Follow through is hard. We talked for another 20 minutes. She asked questions about the Whitman case. Real questions. What had his injuries been? How long had he been in the ICU? What had made the case so difficult? And I answered, not because I needed her approval, but because she was finally trying. When we left the cafe, she hugged me. "Thank you for giving me another chance," she said. I didn't say anything, because I hadn't decided yet if I was giving her another chance or just letting her try. Over the next few weeks, things slowly started to shift. My mother called me once a week, not to talk about Lauren or my father or the neighbors, to ask about my work. She asked what cases I was working on. She asked what it was like to train new nurses. She asked if the committee work was going well, and for the first time in my life, she listened. My father was slower to change. He still didn't fully understand what I did, but he stopped making comments about me assisting doctors. He started referring to me as an ICU nurse instead of just a nurse. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. Lauren texted me one night, "Mom's been reading articles about ICU nursing. She sent me one yesterday. I think she's actually trying." I smiled. "Yeah, I think so too." In early June, the hospital held a smaller event for staff and their families. It was a picnic in the park behind the medical center, meant to celebrate the completion of the new ICU wing. My mother asked if she and my father could come. I said yes. They showed up early, both of them dressed too formally for a picnic, and spent the afternoon talking to my co-workers. My mother asked Vanessa how long she'd been a nurse. She asked Dr. Chen about respiratory therapy. She asked another ICU nurse named Julia what her typical day looked like. and she actually listened to the answers. At one point, Dr. Torres came over and introduced herself to my parents. "You must be Rachel's family," she said. My mother nodded. "We are. And thank you for what you said at the dinner. It meant a lot." Dr. Torres smiled. "I only said what was true. Your daughter is one of the best nurses I've ever worked with." My father extended his hand. "We're very proud of her." And for the first time, I think he actually meant it. Later that evening, as we were packing up to leave, my mother pulled me aside. "I'm glad we came," she said. "Me too." She looked at me, her expression soft. "I see you now, Rachel. I really do." I nodded, my throat tight. "Good." A few weeks after that, something unexpected happened. I got a letter in the mail. Not an email, an actual handwritten letter. The return address was unfamiliar, but when I opened it, I recognized the name immediately. David Whitman, the patient from the case Dr. Torres had talked about. The letter was short. "Dear Rachel, I don't know if you remember me. I was in your ICU in March after a car accident. I don't remember much from that time, but I remember your voice. I remember you telling me I was going to be okay. I remember feeling like if you said it, it must be true. I'm writing because I wanted to thank you, not just for the medical care, but for treating me like a person when I felt like I was disappearing. I'm doing well now. I'm back at work. I'm spending time with my kids. I'm alive because of you. I don't know if you hear that enough, but you should. Thank you. David." I read it 3 times. Then I put it on my fridge next to the email from Dr. Torres. Because sometimes you need reminders that the work you do matters, even when the people closest to you forget. That weekend, I went to my parents' house for dinner. When I walked in, I noticed something new on the mantel. It was a framed photo from the recognition dinner. Someone had taken it while I was standing during Dr. Torres's speech. I was looking toward the front of the room, my hands clasped in front of me, my face serious. My mother saw me looking at it. "I hope that's okay," she said. I asked the hospital if they had any photos from that night, and they sent me a few. I thought that one captured the moment. I stared at it. It was sitting next to Lauren's college graduation photo and my father's retirement plaque. Equal. I looked at my mother. "It's perfect," she smiled. "We should have done this a long time ago." "Yeah," I said quietly. "You should have." Dinner that night was different. My father asked about the committee I was on. My mother asked if I was still mentoring new nurses. Lauren asked about a case I'd mentioned the week before. And for the first time in 17 years, I felt like they actually cared about the answers. It wasn't perfect. My parents still didn't fully understand the intricacies of what I did. They still sometimes said things that showed how little they knew about nursing. But they were trying, and that was more than they'd done before. A few months later, I was invited to speak at a nursing conference about critical care leadership. My mother asked if she could come. I was surprised. "It's going to be pretty technical," I said. "I know," she said, "but I'd like to be there anyway." So she came. She sat in the audience and listened to me talk about the Whitman case, about ICU protocols, about what it means to lead in a high-stakes environment. And when I finished, she was the first one to stand and clap. Afterward, she came up to me, her eyes wet. "I'm so proud of you," she said, "and I'm sorry it took me so long to say it the right way." I hugged her. "Thank you." Because sometimes that's all you need, not perfection, just effort. Here's what I learned from all of this. Your family doesn't get to decide your value. They don't get to minimize your work just because they don't understand it. And you don't owe them proof of your worth. But if they're willing to listen, if they're willing to learn, if they're willing to admit they were wrong, then maybe there's room to rebuild. Not because you need their approval, but because real respect is built on effort, not assumptions. My parents said I was just a nurse. They said it for 17 years. Then the head of surgery stood in front of 200 people and told them exactly what I was: a leader, a problem solver, someone who saved lives. And my family finally started to understand that those things had been true all along. From my point of view, this story is a reminder that respect isn't about titles or credentials or how impressive your job sounds at a party. It's about recognizing skill, dedication, and the quiet strength it takes to do hard work well. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is stand firm in your own worth, even when the people closest to you don't see it yet. And if they're willing to grow, if they're willing to try, then maybe that's enough. So, I'll ask you this. Have you ever been really good at something and had the people you love treat it like it didn't matter? And if so, how did you find the strength to keep going? If this story meant something to you, if it reminded you that your work has value even when others don't see it, I'd be grateful if you'd subscribe. There are more stories like this, stories about people who refuse to shrink, and I'd love to share them with you.